I have a story, Jay.
What's this?
I was gonna go to the art store. I didn't
Mhm.
end up doing that.
Mhm.
I felt this pull. I've passed this bookstore so many times. Little bookstore.
Mhm.
Never went. And something that day, I was just like, I should go into that bookstore.
Oh?
Oh, yes.
Oh, did you perhaps find the magic of Kryn?
Yes.
Wow! Margaret Weiss
So,
and Tracy Hickman!
I haven't had a chance to crack it open. I wanted to try to crack it
Sure.
open before we recorded this.
Uh-huh.
I was just, when I got into this, there's quite a few Dragonlance books in there. I just got this one.
I'm looking at that cover, and look what name I see carved into that
Yes.
stone.
Yes.
Larry Elmore!
Yeah.
Ah!
I was recognizing the names. I was flipping through it, and
Yeah.
now I'm reading it when I go on travel.
Wow! That's so cool.
I was so excited when there were plentiful books. I was so stoked when I saw them.
This is where I go my impact. Let's talk a little bit about the concept of factoring. No, not the mathematical process. This is a highly compressed overview, and Slaying the Dragon covers it in much more detail. Factoring was a system that TSR used where they released their entire slate of projects for the year at the start of the year. They would send it out to all the gaming companies and shops where their products would be sold. Companies would pre-order those products in January. Then, TSR would sell those contracts for the pre-orders to banks. The banks would skim about 18% off the top, and bing, bang, zoom. TSR now got paid in January for most of the money it would make across the entire year.
It's a little terrifying.
Yeah, this did a few things for TSR. First, it gave TSR a big upfront infusion of cash they could carefully distribute across the year, ensuring they always met their obligations on time. And it let them set realistic budgets for all their projects. Now, it let them set realistic budgets, but did they set realistic budgets? No. The TSR of this era is fondly remembered for gorgeous boxes of luxurious products. Books came with maps, miniatures, dice, full-color books with stunning art, and play aids that enhanced the player experience. But each of those gizmos and gadgets drove up production costs, and those costs drove down profits. Worse yet, TSR didn't really project how much a product would cost in its final form. They did not have a strong accounting department. The designers of these games often had no idea about the sales figures of their games either. They only ever heard what people told them at conventions, and what they kept hearing was that people loved all the new settings. Second edition became the edition of settings. With the advent of the Forgotten Realms and Dragonlance, TSR had learned that a truly inspired setting could push a multimedia empire. There were Dragonlance novels, video games, and comic books.
One right here!
Yeah, one right here.
1987?
And so TSR began to invest heavily in creating more settings for its players to get immersed in. And they made sure to include plenty of beautiful add-ons to ensure they'd catch the buyer's eye. One of these new settings was dreamed up by Jeff Grubb. Spelljammer came out of a pitch meeting at a local sandwich shop with Jim Ward. The idea was to take advantage of the Manual of the Planes, something Grubb had worked on before but had never really been used for much. They felt that D&D was often limited to just traditional fantasy settings in people's minds. They wanted Spelljammer to be a fun, spacefaring adventure which would broaden people's perception of D&D. Then there was the idea for Dark Sun. Dark Sun was the brainchild of Mary Kershoff, Troy Denning, and Tim Brown. Denning said that they wanted to create an extreme setting that would push the game and dungeon masters to their limits. It was a desert world where the gods were dead. It was a bleak and unforgiving setting. Troy Denning is one of those people who, if your company generates one genius of this level, then it should be impossible to ruin that company. The fact that he stands shoulder to shoulder with no less than half a dozen best-selling novelists at TSR, and TSR was still struggling, just shows how poorly managed that company was. Troy Denning produced dozens of novel tie-ins for D&D over the year. Troy Denning continued to write for TSR for years, as well as working in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, and eventually moving to work on Halo novels, which he still works on to this day. Tim Brown was already an award-winning designer before he ever even arrived at TSR. Previously, he had worked on one of the biggest TTRPGs outside of D&D, Traveler. As such, it's no surprise that when he landed at TSR, he was appointed Director of Game Development and hit the ground running. Besides helping to create Dark Sun, he oversaw the Planescape and Ravenloft lines, and eventually he'd revamp the basic line into the Black Box, its final version. In 1996, he left an ailing TSR to join Imperium Games, and from there he'd have a long career in games, moving through various companies. Kirchhoff, Brown, and Denning wanted the Dark Sun books to feature an artist unlike any other at TSR, and a big part of establishing that unique identity for this setting was tapping Gerald Brom as their artist. But most people just call him Brom. Brom was a classic TSR artist. An army brat, he spent his childhood moving from place to place, and just like Elroy, he found himself inspired by the heroic machismo of Frank Frazetta's work, and the gorgeous down-home sensibilities of Norman Rockwell's paintings. He self-taught and developed a detailed painting style, but he tended to take things in a bold, new, darker direction than his contemporaries. At just 20 years old, he had already worked for Coca-Cola, IBM, CNN, and Columbia Pictures. At 24 in 1989, he started full-time at TSR. TSR often didn't know what to do with him, since his style was not the bright, colorful artwork of the other D&D artists, but that made him perfect for Dark Sun. During work on Dark Sun, he'd often just start painting, and then the game designers would look at his art and write in the things he drew. He said he felt very involved with the creative process.
Well, that's the dream.
Yeah.
That's the dream of the artist right there. I'm looking at that, and the artist's fantastic.
Oh yeah, he's incredible. He would go on to work for TSR, WotC, White Wolf, and various publishers, movie studios, and video games over the years. We talked a little bit about Tracy Hickman before during Dragonlance, but we didn't cover the other half of the dynamic duo. Long before they worked at TSR, Laura and Tracy Hickman had been writing adventures for themselves. However, when Tracy got saddled with a huge debt, they decided to submit their adventures to TSR for some quick money. This made Laura Hickman one of the earliest women to design for D&D. The pair moved to Wisconsin and started working for TSR. Laura and Tracy first developed Dragonlance, then they began to develop Ravenloft. Tracy Hickman and his wife Laura Hickman first dreamed up Ravenloft in 1978. They found the use of vampires in D&D a bit absurd. Standing around in dark crypts waiting to be slaughtered, they began to flesh out and devise their own vampire character, Strahd von Zarovich. They ran this setting for Halloween for 5 years, and eventually TSR asked them to release it as an adventure module. The first publication of Ravenloft was in 1983, however it wouldn't become its own setting until 1990. With Tracy busy working on Dragonlance, Laura took leadership of developing the setting out into a full product for TSR. She was assigned Andria Heydey and Anne Brown to assist her. When asked what drew the trio to horror, Anne Brown said this: "I'm pretty sure Laura, Andria, and I all grew up during the Dark Shadows era. Maybe that was an early influence. I also wonder why girls' middle school slumber parties have often included attempts to hold seances. Maybe there was just something about the spooky mood, the unknown, and the suspense of whether something would happen." Ravenloft pushed TSR in a bold new direction: horror. It appealed to a different kind of player. It wasn't about looting and smashing doors. It was about the atmosphere, mood, and suspense. It challenged D&D to be more than just a game about fighting monsters, and these women ensured that D&D rose to that challenge. And we can't ignore the fact that around this time, Vampire the Masquerade was taking off in popularity. It actually, yeah, it was. Yeah, this is the 1990s now, so we're getting into the era where a ton of big games are starting to come out.
Gosh, that was that. Okay.
Yeah. That would lead to yet another very important TSR setting. If we're going to discuss TSR settings of the 90s, we have to talk about Planescape. Planescape owes a lot of its identity to White Wolf. White Wolf was the publisher of Vampire the Masquerade. D&D had been going long enough that it was no longer the edgy, rebellious game. Instead, it was seen as your dad's RPG. Vampire's audience skewed younger, more goth, and more female. Vampire came with a large number of factions. These factions gave players an instant buy-in to the world, a group they were part of and groups they were against. This mechanic encouraged roleplay and made the game wildly popular. TSR wanted that for D&D. They tapped Zeb Cook. Zeb decided to use the Manual of the Planes and Spelljammer as launching points. One thing Spelljammer had lacked was a central location, so he devised Sigil. Sigil was a large, donut-shaped city at the center of every plane of existence, and thus the imaginative and varied settings of Planescape were born. TSR wanted to ensure the product did well, and so they called in their best talents. They called in Andria Heydey. She had already distinguished herself with her work on the Ravenloft setting. Andria Heydey was a creative director for TSR. Her specialty was getting products out on time, on budget, and ensuring the team got the resources they need to do their work. In an interview with Monte Cook later, he said of her, "She and Dave managed to shield us from the eye of Sauron, getting us the resources we needed while keeping management from paying too much attention to us. Planescape fans owe a lot to her. Without her support, for example, I'm sure I could have never brought back Orcus in 2nd edition, at least not while D&D was owned by TSR. It was now common knowledge that a great setting needed a great artist. Dark Sun had Braum, Dragonlance had Elmore, and Planescape had Tony DiTerlizzi. DiTerlizzi was inspired by the art of Dave Trampier and the art of AD&D. He also cites Dr. Seuss and Norman Rockwell as inspirations, among many others. Unlike many other TSR artists, he did go to art school, the Florida School of the Arts and the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. When he was hired by TSR in 1993, he said, "My entire goal was to blow away other artists. That helped me get the job for the Planescape setting." His art is incredible, a perfect contrast to what Braum was doing. Colorful, but also monochromatic, with organic shapes and cartoonish proportions. DiTerlizzi immediately gave Planescape a style and a tone of a world where the absurd and the horrifying walk side by side on the streets. A realm of pure imaginative chaos, exactly what the setting was trying to convey. DiTerlizzi's work at TSR and beyond speaks for itself. He's worked for movies, games, and for many other role-playing companies. However, perhaps his most famous work is the Spiderwick Chronicles. In the most recent re-release of Planescape by Wizards of the Coast, DiTerlizzi was invited back to do several key illustrations for the books, an acknowledgement of how important his style is, and forever will be, to the setting. Another important figure to draw attention to is Colin McComb. Colin was an editor for Planescape and helped take over the line after Zeb left the company to go work on some no-name project called Fallout 2.
Never heard of that before.
Yeah, Colin McComb eventually left TSR to join Zeb on the Fallout 2 team. The two loved the work that they had done on Planescape and saw it as a perfect place for an RPG like Fallout. There was another project in the company, known as Torment, which had been having a rough time finding a footing and identity for itself. Planescape Torment would rise from this project and become one of the most foundational CRPGs ever made, and one of the most iconic pieces of D&D media for decades to come. If we look at things from a monetary perspective only, Planescape was a tremendous failure. It was expensive to make and it just didn't sell that well. But we don't work in accounting, and we don't have to be limited in that way. We can appreciate art. The fact that TSR could take this much talent and this much staggering content and could not capitalize on it in a way that was profitable speaks to how truly wretched that company was, more than it says anything about the product of Planescape. Planescape was, for many, the height of the TSR era. And from that lofty height, they were about to take a big fall. I mean, Brennan Lee Mulligan cites Planescape as being one of the things that got him into D&D originally.
I did see that recently.
Yeah. Here's the problem with the settings business model. More and more people weren't fans of D&D. They were fans of the settings. Greyhawk fans, Planescape fans, Dark Sun fans, and so they chopped their core audience down and down and down until only a sliver of the audience would buy any given product. Soon enough, these gorgeous settings weren't even turning a profit. And at least part of that is because 2nd edition itself was not that popular. They had a small starting audience, and each of these settings carved that audience to pieces. In 1995, TSR produced Dragon Dice. Dragon Dice was a collectible dice game. The hope was, somewhat ironically, retrospectively, to compete with a collectible card game called Magic the Gathering. For this purpose, they tapped longtime contributing artist Jennell Jaquays to create some of the logos and branding. Jennell Jaquays was a fan of D&D. In 1975, she did the most college thing imaginable and started a zine. Dungeoneer was its name. In 1979, she wrote and published in it an award-winning adventure called Dark Tower. Dungeon Magazine would go on to create a list of the 30 greatest adventures of all time for their 30th anniversary. Not only was Dark Tower on the list, it was the only adventure on the list not published by TSR. After publishing herself for 2 years, she became a contributor and sold the magazine. After this, she began to divide her time equally between writing adventures and art. Tim Kask was actually the first person to buy her art, and he gave her a casual license for her zine to allow it to be published with D&D related content. Jaquays followed the path of many designers of that era, moving into video games. She worked for ColecoVision for a while, and then moved on to id Software, where she was a level designer for the Quake franchise for years. She continued to write adventures and work on games for years, eventually helping to found the Guildhall, one of the first video game design college degrees in the country, and a program which continues to rank number 4 among the top 25 graduate schools for game design. In 2012, she made a post on her personal website where she came out as trans. She announced she was a trans lesbian. She became the creative director for the Transgender Human Rights Institute of Seattle. Jennell Jaquays joined a growing movement to outlaw conversion therapy for minors, eventually getting the attention of President Barack Obama, who made a public address about the dangers of conversion therapy. 22 states have banned gay conversion therapy for minors, protecting roughly 47% of at-risk queer youth in America. There's also an additional 11% in states with partial bans, and that is at least in part thanks to the activism of an accomplished artist, author, and game designer named Jennell Jaquays. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take a quick step out of D&D history for a moment. In October, Jennell Jaquays got sick with a severe bout of Guillain-Barré syndrome. Her spouse, Rebecca Ann Heineman, has been caring for her. Her prognosis currently looks good, but she has a long way to go to recover. She has a GoFundMe going on presently to help offset the cost of her medical emergency. And if you can help, I can't think of many people more worthy of your support. The link will be down below. Yeah, Jennell Jaquays is currently having a bit of a rough spot, but it looks like she's going to be okay. But yeah, I mean, what an incredible person. I mean, one of the earliest designers for D&D, made one of the best adventures of all time as ranked by the D&D official magazine, went on to be a prolific video game designer and trans activist. Like, what a life.
Yeah, always love to see more rep.
Very cool.
I'll have to look more into her work.
Dragon Dice released to extremely positive reviews. TSR decided to go all in on Dragon Dice and had the market flooded with new collectible expansion packs for the game. However, the novelty of the game wasn't something like a card game that would keep customers coming back for more. TSR had dramatically overestimated demand, and they were hit with a wave of buybacks as shops returned the extremely expensive boxes back to TSR. Meanwhile, remember factoring? Well, they had just sold a ton of CD-ROMs of the PHP to Babbage's, and then Babbage's declared bankruptcy. And because of factoring, they have to honor their contract. These CD-ROMs were a new product, and as soon as they hit Babbage's, they went into liquidation, which destroyed the market for the product line. This soured everyone on the new CD-ROM projects, and they began canceling orders that TSR had already been paid for, and the money from which they had already spent. More debt. Well, that's okay, we'll just make more products. Boom. Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no, the bomb.
I thought you said it'd be fine.
In
you
the
said
90s.
forget about it.
In the 90s, to fight off obligations elsewhere, TSR had begun a truly toxic practice. They were buying books from Random House just for the loans. Often these books would sit unsold in warehouses, but the loans were vital to making ends meet. But these loans predicated on TSR actually selling the product eventually. This was clearly an abuse of the system. In 1995, Random House had finally had enough. TSR now owed $11 million, and Random House wanted their money. They established a repayment plan. TSR agreed. Then they missed the payment deadline. Random House sued them. TSR stopped paying their printer to pay Random House. Their printer stopped printing books. Now the money had stopped flowing. Layoffs began. Jim Ward was told to pick 20 people to fire. Instead, he resigned. David Wise was the next person given the grim task. Wise had been an on-again, off-again employee. His first tenure here ended after the purges of the Blooms. Then in the 90s, he was rehired to sell the books to hobby shops. Now it was his job to fire people at Christmas. This is an all too familiar story these days. Wise agonized over the list. He felt like if he refused, another person would simply be given the task. He could at least pick the people who were absolutely essential to protect, so that the company could keep making products. At least that's what he believed. But once he turned it in, he was told to go back and make a second list, then a third. On the day of the Christmas party, HR went around telling people to pack up their things. The entire day, the company ground to a standstill as everyone wondered if they were next. Even those who survived had to watch their tear-streaked faces of their coworkers leaving one by one. At the end of the day, Wise himself was then fired. He said that they didn't even use the list he'd agonized over making.
Wait, so they made him go... Someone resigned to not write that list.
Correct.
And then they made him write it, only to not use it.
Correct.
Gosh.
Everyone struggled to work. Royalty payments stopped flowing out to the authors. Everyone was ready now, ready for it all to end. They'd been in a perpetual hell for months. Perhaps for some of them, an ending would be a relief. In fairly short order, Lorraine Williams used the last tool she had at her disposal to preserve this company. She took out loans using the intellectual property of the company as collateral. Now, if the company were to go under, every book and a product would be auctioned off piecemeal. One company could buy the PHB, another could buy the DMG, the game would be chopped up and sold to the highest bidder. At this point, there was no saving TSR, but she had just ensured that if TSR went under, there would be little hope of saving D&D either. These people had come here to work for Gary Gygax. Now Gygax is gone, Mincer is gone, Jim Ward is gone, the money was running out. Each Friday they were forced to watch their coworkers get laid off. One employee commented that every day they'd go to lunch, they'd become afraid that they'd come back and the doors would be locked. This was how these people were living. That is a hellish existence, and it has got to come to an end. And, one way or another, it will.
What a cliffhanger. How could you do this to me?
Alright, well, moving on from that happy time, let's get into our character. Your character this time was made using the expanded options for rogues, the complete rogues handbook.
We didn't talk about this. Were there expanded options for every...
Yeah, so this was a product line during 2nd edition where they released a complete blank handbook for every class in the game. And these are effectively the game's first go at, like, subclasses.
Yeah.
Little flavored bundles of proficiencies, abilities, and weapon proficiencies that gear skew a class more in one direction or the other. So we rolled our stats, and we rolled stats that were suitable for a rogue. And so we decided to, so then I picked the rogue handbook and I bought it and we opened it up and we used one of the options in that book to make our character this time. So to make your character this time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a look. Here we are. It's Bug. So Bug is a halfling thief, and the kit is Troubleshooter.
That was honestly the most interesting one to me. I mean, the others were fine, but I just liked the idea of, no, this is the thief that's not a thief, but definitely is still a thief.
Yeah.
Other thieves hate him.
But as you can see, our stats were kind of trash. 6, 13, 14 con, 8 int, 10 whiz, 13 charisma.
And with a 6 strength, I am again stuck in the hell of can't carry things.
Again. 4 hit points this time, not bad.
That's pretty beefy. Last time there were only 2.
Yeah. We learned a little bit more about the skill system this time. We learned that Tumble can give you an armor class buff, apparently.
Yes.
As long as you don't attack on your turn, you can get a boost to your armor class when you're tumbling.
Which is very useful, because I wear no armor.
Yeah. You wear no armor because it gives you a bunch of boost to your rogue stuff. As we can see over here, we can see these additional numbers down the side. These red numbers are your no armor bonuses.
Well, no, the red numbers were the 60
Oh, right.
point?
The armor adds are these black numbers. Got it.
Yes.
Let me scoot this over a little bit so people can see better. Yeah. So the purple numbers are the bases, and then the red numbers are your racial bonuses.
No, the from having 60 points for thief.
Oh, right, yeah. Because we have 60
different
points to
things.
distribute among our stats, and you get 30 more each level, which feels very video gamey to me.
It does.
Like
it really does.
Yeah, like having like a pool of points to level up
Distribute
on.
your stat points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we took some skills. There are some expanded skills in the new book.
Yes.
So we
Which
had
was, I think most of them are from there. No.
Yeah. So info gathering and observation are both new. Tumbling and tightrope walking are old. So
And
about
for,
half and half.
for troubleshooter, and I think it's for every class. I mainly was looking at troubleshooter. Observation is required, so I had to spend one of my slots there on observation, or I wouldn't be able to be a troubleshooter. I think each of the subclasses had a different kind of proficiency they shoehorned you with.
And then the ability of troubleshooter you have summarized as Murphy's Law. It's just like good or bad, you will find the most extreme outcomes of any situation.
Yeah.
So like when you're...
But it was also like, but it's usually bad for the troubleshooter because you're specifically looking for trouble.
Well, I think they're specifically like it's supposed to be as bad as good, right? Like it's supposed to balance out. I think
it is supposed to balance out, but like there was like the way it was written, kind of had been like it's supposed to be balanced, but like hey, this is a thief. They're actively looking for problems.
Yes.
So you should make some problems.
Yeah, exactly. And it even tells you to like be funny about it, like to have some fun with it, which I thought was like very roleplay focused, for this game, which, traditionally hasn't been as worried about roleplay, more mechanically focused. This was very explicitly like a roleplay feature.
Okay.
Which, again, we're sort of playing with subclasses, we're playing with class-specific abilities, we're really starting to get some of the feeling of more modern iterations of D&D here. And then, obviously you spent your gold, as usual.
Got a donkey.
We got a donkey and a goose.
I like the goose. I don't know. Goose was an option. I've already bought chickens.
If goose is an option, why not get goose?
Yeah. Geese lay eggs. They're also very aggressive, and if I can't attack, I don't know, maybe my goose will distract them.
And let's look at the amazing art. Oh,
yes.
Look at this super cute character. I mean, come on.
Oh,
so
it's not
cool, too. Like, so cool.
It's not showing. Oh, there it is.
It just like so you did these energy arms.
I did, and that's entirely because when I sketched out the character,
the
sketch looked like a mechanical leg, and I was like, troubleshooter, mechanical leg. Honestly, that probably works pretty well.
Yeah, you can imagine they've gotten into quite a few scrapes due to their Murphy's Law ability.
Yeah.
They haven't quite gotten away unscathed from them all.
No, not at all. And I just thought the energy arbs were fun. So
yeah, it's very cool. It's very different.
It's very not halfling from second edition. But...
I love this style, though. I really feel like a video game could have this style. It would be amazing. Just like the character, there's so much like three-dimensionality to it, despite it being fairly simple. Like I love how the hair really feels like so big and round and foofy. It's so cute. So what is your main takeaway here from the expanded players options?
So, at least when I was making, I got really into this character. I ended up trying to figure out, okay, what would this character be in 5e? And so I played around with like 3 different character sheets, and didn't really settle on any, but I was just like, I was writing about this character. I was just so excited. I think part of it had to do with actually like the kit for troubleshooter, because they're supposed to kind of be like subclasses, right? But it also kind of feels like it also works in like the character's background as well.
Sure.
The kit is what your character is good at, like what is your character's niche. Whereas like subclasses nowadays, and maybe it's just maybe I just never thought about it this way, but when I think about like lore bard and like glamour bard and the different subclasses of like 5e bard, it doesn't really feel like each of those subclasses is for a specific niche for me, where these kits almost feel more, I don't want to say shoehorned into a role, but maybe it's because it forces you to take certain like proficiencies in there, right? And like it's got its recommendations for points and all, but something about the way it was written just kind of made it feel more specialized than just lore bard, right, or glamour bard. Which I mean is like good and bad, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're kind of stuck with all the troubleshooter stuff, even if you don't want some of it, right?
Yeah.
But I think something about it just made like a fun character, and helping me figure out who the character was, which was probably pretty good because you have 4 HP, you're dying pretty quickly, and you probably won't survive resurrection. So if you're rolling up like multiple characters, right, and you're trying to figure out like who is this person, now there's a more specified niche for this is what they're good at that you can kind of work off of, and I kind of appreciated it. It was fun.
Yeah, I'm glad that you really got into this character in a way that you haven't with previous characters. That's interesting to me, and I think that speaks to as they start to add these sort of role play oriented assets, as they start to add like the troubleshooter comes with a bunch of description text about what it is, and it's a very specific role, like you were saying, and that very specific role gives you it's evocative of a specific kind of character, and it gets your mind going about, well, why does my character troubleshoot? Like, what made them a troubleshooter, and what does it mean to be Murphy's Law, right? To have like bad things happening and good things happening in extremes all the time. And I think that kind of stuff lays the groundwork, as you said, for stuff later, like backgrounds and subclasses and more specific classes, as opposed to everything being a subclass of 3 classes or whatever. Now they're going to kind of divide them out a little bit more, niche them off. Yeah. You
want to know what the nice thing is, right? Because what was it? There's still some classes where if you're not rolling like 3/15s, you ain't playing those classes, right? But the subclass kind of opens, or like these kits kind of open up more avenues, right? It makes you feel like you have more options rather than, I rolled really bad on anything. Good thing I can still be a thief.
Yeah,
right?
Because our rogue, right, doesn't have any really good stats besides Dex, but they were able to pick from 10 options to
I still had whereas before it really felt like, okay, I'm a cleric, or
I rolled this. I'm a rogue. I'm a thief.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a thief. I'm just a regular thief. Yeah.
Yeah, so it felt like it opened up those options, which was really nice, because if you're playing, like, if you just roll real bad and you're just like, okay, I'm a rogue, now there's some, at least some different flavors.
Yeah, because that's something that else that D&D is going to really lean into going forward is customization. Oh, yeah. Like making each PC really unique from each other, even within the same class and even within the same archetype. No two 5th edition rogues are going to have the exact same list of feats or ASIs or things like that, skill proficiencies, that sort of thing. All that customization stuff is really something that they start figuring out here and carry forward in a big way into 3rd edition, where all of that stuff really gels and solidifies.
And I think one thing that was also kind of cool, at least for the troubleshooter part, is specifically because I didn't read the others, and how do the other thieves interact with other types of thieves? And it's like, no, most thieves, like this thief, not connected to the guild. Thieves guilds don't like these guys because they work with people to shore up their defenses.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes sense, but it's like a fun new angle to kind of think about, right? Because you usually have like, oh, I'm a thief, you're a thief, tell me about the area,
Yeah, sure.
These guys might not get that.
Yeah, it again, it's customization. It tailors your experience in a unique direction. Yeah, absolutely. I think that like as we go from here into 3rd edition, I I really think they're playing with a lot of ideas that they're not really going to crystallize until 3rd edition, which is next. We're about to do it. We're about to go there. For the first time in a long time, we will be making 3rd edition characters, which I'm very excited for and also somewhat dreading, because it's a very involved process. But I'm really, I really, like, in this book, I can see the bones of the skill system in the non-weapon proficiency. I can see the bones of subclasses in these player guides.
I also just love some of the, like, the proficiencies and skill. I think it's some of the skills, because the proficiencies and skills are, like, slightly different or something like that. But one of them was just singing.
Yeah.
And it's like later on that, like, that and some others, right, probably get rolled into, like, performance. Right?
Yeah, and didn't they have you roll a percentile die for one of your non-weapon proficiencies?
Yeah, probably.
Weaver Taylor. So, like,
well, that was like the secondary, like, who were you before?
Yeah, so that's almost like a background, right? That's your background, and then this is your subclass, and then so you're really starting to see all these ideas in earnest, and then in the next edition they are going to crank that dial to 11 and turn all this shit way up. The volume's going to go way up on these role-play focused features. Because I think, like, if I'm being honest, I think one of the reasons 2nd edition struggled is because, like, people are playing with this AD&D ass, this AD&D ass old shit, right? And Call of Cthulhu's on the market now. Vampire the Masquerade's on the market now. Like they're competing against role-playing games with the capital R, capital P, like role-playing games. Yeah. And these are very much like old-school war-gamey combat games, like very simple dungeon-crawling looter games.
Don't remind me of Chainmail.
Yeah, and they're now competing with, like, proper RPGs that are, like, way beyond them in development. And I think it's kind of funny because with 3rd edition, and I'm trying not to get too into 3rd edition because we'll talk about it next time, but with 3rd edition, they really sat down and they said, like, we are behind the times, and we are supposed to be the industry leader. Like, we need to be innovating new stuff, not, following 10 years behind the trend. Like, so much of what we talked about this episode. They started Ravenloft because of Vampire the Masquerade. They started Planescape because of the guilds in Vampire the Masquerade. Like, they are becoming a company that apes from everyone around them instead of being the company that everyone around them apes. And that is a big shift in the power dynamic for the original tabletop RPG. And that, they got to figure that out. And I think next time they will. So
and there's one other thing. There's so many things, right?
Oh, sure.
I did build this. I started building this character out a little more. In that, right, as you're looking through all the proficiencies, right, or like the things you can take, you get more points or slots where you can take more proficiencies. I think, like as you level, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and because part of it's tied to, it's like, okay, you get your number of languages plus this number, and that's how many like proficiencies you can take or something. But going through the items, saying, "Oh, I'm a troubleshooter. I'm a thief. I have an option to buy a hand mirror. Ooh, if I took read lips, right? That opens up a whole new fun, thing. So maybe it's a one-off thing where it's like, oh, I'm gonna try to read their lips while, looking through the mirror so they don't know I'm looking at them. But it makes it easier to kind of get lost in that. I think this would be a cool idea. I want to try that thing. How do I kind of go to get there? Which requires a level up, which was uncommon.
Yeah.
Because everybody died.
So fast.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. Like, you can... that's like going into that customization angle where you're like, now you're starting to plan your build, alright? Like, there was no planning your build previously, because when you leveled up, you just got more hit points and maybe more attacks. Now it's like, oh, I could get new proficiencies that allow me to do new things at higher levels. That's kind of interesting. And again, next time, that's going to go to 11. Like, planning your build is going to become a thing that people, like, start blogs about starting next time.
As they should.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me, as always, Ailoth.
Yeah.
Everyone, goodbye!
Bye!